Welcome back. This is a new top 10 list. Of course, Goku-san DBZ here. And this time I am going to be looking at 10 of my personal all-time favorite Sega exclusive games. Now, this is when it was originally released. It may have gotten re-released later on in a compilation or re-released as remastered or some for a different console, but this is looking at games that were originally console released, and some of these which have not been re-released on other consoles at all. So, first we have a lot of honorable mentions before we get to the top 10. So with that said, first looking at a great Sega Genesis fighter, which I feel is underrated and surprisingly has never been re-released, weirdly enough, and that is of course the fighting game known as Eternal Champions. Is a great Sega exclusive, which would get one sequel for the Sega CD, but it's never gotten re-released on any collections that I know of or anything, which is kind of weird, but a great underrated fighter, in my opinion. Also, honorable mentions, arguably, in my opinion, maybe the best 8-bit era RPG. At least that's in my opinion anyways, and that is a game that was released exclusively for the Sega Master System. And of course that is Miracle Warriors Seal of the Dark Lord. It is seriously a superb, great, it actually has a decent story and stuff for given when it came out, because this game was originally released in 1988. So, yeah, needless to say, for the time, there wasn't a huge amount of competition 8-bit, like, action RPGs, but this definitely was a great one, though it did also implement turn-based mechanics, obviously, given it came out in the time period at the beginning era of Final Fantasy as well as Dragon Quest. So, it was, at the time, there weren't really major established franchises, but this was a superb and I think deserves an honorable mention, and I wish it would get like remade or re-released. Also, arguably, probably one of the least well-known superb 16-bit action RPGs for the Sega Genesis, as you see right there. Basically, this was considered a Zelda clone. It definitely had gameplay elements. Certain elements definitely remind me heavily of The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past specifically. Well, that's not a bad thing, because Link to the Past is in my top 3 favorite Zelda games. But this game is criminally underrated, and yeah, if you're at all interested, this is actually a reproduction of the game, because if you want an original version of this one, you're going to be showing out over $500. So yeah, good luck with that one. So yeah, if you're all curious, look it up, check out some gameplay or reviews and stuff here on YouTube, or, like I did, get a reproduction. About the only option for a reasonable price. Also, criminally underrated, I think, somewhat fine games, surprisingly would not get re-released until, and strictly digitally only, on the 7th console generation. Also, you can get this in the PlayStation Store for Vita and PS3 and stuff. But a criminally underrated, one of probably the most underrated 2D fighters from, of course, that is the great Capcom. But this is actually where Jin in, of course, Marvel vs. Capcom actually origins came from this game. It's a superb game if you're all curious to check out. I did back years ago a playthrough of this game. Maximilian Dude's also done some stuff on Cyberbots. But check it out, Cyberbots Full Metal Madness. Great exclusive in my opinion. Also, have to mention when it comes to honorable mentions, of course, Virtua Fighter Remix, which was the first fighting game I would actually ever play on the console. Definitely holds a special place for me. This was the game that made me become a Virtua Fighter fan. But it would be another game that would definitely keep me loyal to the series. And yeah, believe it or not, also honorable mention, Street Fighter 3 Double Impact and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Yeah, these were, of course, released exclusively on, obviously, the Dreamcast. Now, Street Fighter 3 Third Strike would also get added later on in like an anniversary collection, as well as later on there would be also, of course, the online edition, which is probably the definitive version to play this game. But yeah, and this has not been re-released. The only way you can play these is if you get the Street Fighter like 30th anniversary collection. That's it. Otherwise, you have to go to the Dreamcast if you want these games, the original versions. So to this day, strangely enough, Street Fighter 3 remains an exclusive, or more specifically, Double Impact. At least if you want physical, this is the only way to play the original versions, not in the arcade. So it is interesting. And last of the honorable mentions is, I think, one of the most underrated survival horror games of the time. That is a great game, believe it or not, done by Activision, though this was done the days before Activision would become super hated and despised like it is today, mostly thanks to Bobby Kotick. But with that said, Blue Stinger is a very interesting and unique survival horror game. I remember playing this back in the day when it first came out. I played it around like 2001, if I remember correctly. It is a great game, and I'm surprised more people don't talk about this game here on YouTube, which really stuns me. So in the future, sometime I might do a more in-depth video on Blue Stinger. Let me know if you'd be interested in me doing anything like that with like Dreamcast or anything like that. But with that said, yes, this is a great horror game. I do think more people need to try it, and strangely enough, I don't believe it's gotten a re-release at all. So it's been almost forgotten by time. Coming in at number 10, probably one of the most interesting 3D fighters of all time, in my personal opinion. Coming at number 10 is the unique fighter known as Fighting Vipers, which is very unique, it's pretty much a virtual fighter with other like mascots and other characters from other Sega games. Like one character you can even fight as a car from Daytona, USA, which is really weird. It's a really bizarre fine game, but still, it actually plays pretty solid to this day. And I do highly recommend checking out Fighting Vipers if you ever get the chance. You can get digitally on like PS3 and stuff, relatively cheap as well. Coming at number 9, I'm sure some people will look at me weird about it, but I have nostalgia factor for the game. Coming at number 9 of, I think, great Sega exclusives is a game that has never been re-released except maybe in compilations, and that's it. And that is the classic Echo the Dolphin, The Tides of Time, which is a great 2D era, like a 16-bit, and one of probably the most unique platformer series of all time, given you're playing as a dolphin, basically. It is very bizarre and plays very differently than your traditional platformers of the time period, but maybe it's one of the reasons for people like me and others why we still hold a special place for Echo, because there has never been another platformer like Echo the Dolphin that I can think of. Next, coming in at number 8, I'm sure some people would think it should be higher, but this is my list, so. Coming in at number 8 for me, I think it's superb, great, and finally only in the last couple of years got a remastered re-release. And that is, of course, the original classic Shimmu. Now, some people want to bash on Shimmu. Yes, the dialogue and stuff is very bad, but keep in mind when this game came out, English dubs were not exactly well known for video games at the time. It was a rarity to find really good voice acting in these days. Even today, it's like 50-50, but I still love the cheesy, bad dialogue. It's part of the charm, in my opinion, for the original Shimmu. Sort of like the old school Resident Evils as well. But I will always hold a special place for Shimmu 1. I'm sure many people agree with me. Shimmu is a definitive game to have on the Dreamcast. Or if you don't, pick up the Shimmu HD collection with Shimmu 1 and 2. But seriously, this is a game that deserves a lot more love than it gets, and I don't know why it gets so much criticism from people. But with my opinion, it's a definitive and one of the greatest Sega exclusives of all time. Next, coming in at number 7, is probably one of the best 2D era, or rather, some of the best 3D fighting games of all time. Coming in at number 7 is a tie between Capcom's great, of course, sequel, that being Project Justice, the sequel to, of course, the great and beloved PS1 game known as, of course, Rival Schools. Project Justice, very unique game, and is definitely getting out of control in price nowadays. But still, it's a superb and one of maybe the most unique 3D or 2.5D fighting games of all time that I can think of. And tied with it for 7th place is arguably my favorite of at least the Sega era Virtual Fighter or exclusive era. Arguably my favorite of the exclusives, that being, of course, Virtual Fighter 2, which is an all-time classic. This was the game that made me a permanent fan of Virtual Fighter. Even though I already liked Virtual Fighter Remix, and this would be the second of the games I would play, it's still the one that more or less goes back and forth, still remain my favorite of the series. And yeah, bias and nostalgia heavily influences that. Coming in at number 6 is probably, in my opinion, one of the greatest 2D era or 4th console generation era JRPGs of all time. Coming in 6th place as arguably one of my favorites and one of the greatest Sega RPGs of all time, that being, of course, Phantasy Star 4, which is like the Final Fantasy 6 of the Phantasy Star series, at least in quality, in my opinion. The storytelling, the game mechanics, everything. This game is a definitive and I think a must-have for any Sega Genesis collector, old school Sega fan, or JRPG fan for that matter. But this game will always hold a special place for me personally, which is why it comes in at number 6. Next, coming in, now we crack the top 5. My 5th favorite game of all time, though I would like the sequel or reimagining a bit more, but it wasn't a Sega exclusive game, it was a original Xbox exclusive. This game would get, in more recent times, some re-releases like mobile, Vita, and stuff like that. But for me, coming in 5th place of favorite Sega exclusives of all time is the original Jack Ryan Radio, also known as Jet Set Radio Future in Japan. And will always have a special place for me, and I love, of course, the cover with Beat on the front. Always will love this game. This was the game that started my love for cel shade art style games. And I think because of that, this game has actually aged very well in my opinion. And the soundtrack is still great to this day. Next, coming in at number 5, tied for 4th place is between two incredible Sega exclusive platformers at the time. And of course that is a tie between Sonic 2, which will always be pretty much go back and forth with being my favorite Sonic game, and tied in 4th place with it is of course the incredible, from the creator of Sonic, of course, Nights in the Dreams, which is arguably, I think, a must-have Sega Saturn title. And if in general you are a platformer fan, I consider this a must-play. Now if you don't have a Saturn, say you have a Wii or Wii U, pick up the Wii version of this, which is pretty cheap, really, compared to the Saturn version. Like, you can get the Wii version for like maybe $5 or less, so yeah, definitely a good pickup. I still like the original version with the 3D controller, but that's just me. Still incredible platformers in my opinion. Coming in 3rd place is arguably my all-time favorite Sonic game, and pretty much will probably always hold that spot, given it was the second ever Dreamcast game I ever played and owned. And that being coming in third place, the favorite Sega exclusive at the time games, Sonic Adventure, though later on it would get a re-release on the GameCube. I still consider, though, this a must-play for any Dreamcast fan or any Sonic fan for that matter, which in the future sometime I may do a top 10 list of my personal top 10 favorite Sonic games of all time. Because I know there's many people out there like me who are hardcore Sonic fans and love the franchise, and always will. Coming in second place, arguably one of the most crazily sought after and overpriced games of all time, comes in second place for me personally. And of course, that is Phantasy Star, or rather than Phantasy Star, Panzer Dragoon Saga for the Saturn, which has never been re-released because the originally lost years back the original code. Though they could restructure it like they did for the Final Fantasy VIII remaster, though to be fair, it also had a PC version which they were able to use some of the code from that. This never had a PC release. It remains to this day only on the Saturn, which is why it's so hard to find, because it's never been re-released or anything. So, needless to say, I don't see the price dropping anytime soon for the game. If you are at all curious ever and playing it, you can look up and maybe find a ROM or something of the game, because unless you're a bonkers nutcase. Now, I looked out a few years back, finally get my hands on one of these, because since then it's gone up even more, which is insane. You don't believe me? Look at eBay or at the price charting different websites. It's just ridiculous. But it's a great RPG in my opinion. Coming at number one, shouldn't be any surprise, it was the first game I ever owned for the Dreamcast. It remains my favorite 3D fighting game of all time, and easily my favorite, and it only got re-released and strictly only digitally, unlike the Xbox Arcade or something back years ago, and briefly on mobile, but it got pulled off the digital stores. Coming in number one favorite of Sega exclusive games, that is the original classic Soul Calibur from, of course, Namco Bandai, or at that time just Namco. But it is a great 3D fighter that has aged incredibly well. The mechanics, the gameplay are still solid, the soundtrack is amazing. I can never not praise this game enough. It will always probably be my favorite 3D fighting game of all time. I never see this game getting dethroned, as well as never getting dethroned as my favorite Dreamcast game of all time. But with that said, that is 10 of easily my personal favorite games of all time that were Sega exclusives originally. So with that said, I hope everyone out there has a good rest of summer. Stay safe. Hopefully enjoyed the music in the background I chose today from Sonic 2. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel.